All right, guys, welcome back to the Adam Peter Fitness Podcast. Today on the show, I have Mircea back on. We are going to talk about a drug called Equipoise, which is becoming more of an option, more highly utilized right now, given the current climate with anabolic steroid availability. Usually, people are using this in exchange for Masteron and Primo, which are basically very hard to come by. Or if you can find it, it's going to cost you an arm and a leg. And so we figured we would make this podcast just so that people can kind of understand what they're getting themselves into and what to expect when they actually do start to take the drug. What side effects might be unique to Equipoise. I guess I just want to start off with Mircea explaining a little bit of the history of the EQ.
Well, EQ is a brand name. The original name of the drug is Boldenone. It was discovered in 1949. Through the early 50s and 60s, it was developed with many different esters. They settled on the undecylate ester, which had a very long half-life, longer than the decoonate. So it's 21 to 28 days. So that is a every third week or even a monthly injection. Now, most people get this wrong and they think that uh, Boldenone was never used medically, and that is completely false. Between the 60s and 70s, so about a decade, not 2 years, about a decade, it was used by SIBA Pharmaceuticals. Peranibol was the original name. It was a it was a Dianabol depot because it is the exact same molecule as Dianabol, except instead of the C17 alpha alkylate, it has the 17 on the 17th position has the undecylate ester. So was used as a human drug, Peranibol. Then it was moved to Squibb, which used it as the veterinary drug we all came to know as Equipoise, which was used for horses, hence the equa, equestrian, I believe is the
Mhm.
correct term. And it came in a 50 milligram per milliliter concentration and in 50 milliliter vials. So the standard anabolics come in 10 milliliters. That came in a big 50 jug.
It's crazy.
Yeah, yeah. Um, Widely used in veterinary medicine. Um, of course, came to bodybuilding. The 50 milligrams was not sure if it was intended or not, but to deter humans from using it because yeah, to actually get a 200 milligram dose, you need to take 4 ml, which is highly impractical.
Yeah, that's crazy.
Yeah, pretty much.
So basically made for horses. And humans just
Yes.
realized we get to get the and that's similar to trend from what I remember, right? Except for cows.
Uh, as application, yes, veterinary medicine, trenbolone was used more in cattle. Boldenone was used more in horses. Um, the anabolic androgenic ratio of boldenone is about 100 anabolic to 50 androgenic, so less androgenic than testosterone. Definitely converts to estrogen at a different rate, so it is converted about a 50% rate. More recently, it has come to light that it actually converts to a different type of estrogen. So not the classic E2 estradiol, but a E1 esterone, which is also naturally occurring estrogen in humans. Mostly that is the estrogen that females produce post-menopause. So, females usually have higher E2, lower E1, and during menopause that shifts to higher E1, lower E2. So you can kind of gauge the differences that would have, at least psychologically, but also there are some subtle differences to the physique. Well, for all intents and purposes, yes, you still get a lot of the estrogenic benefits even from E1. It's just slightly different. And Boldenone, why people use it now as a replacement for Drostanolone for Masteron is because it is. pretty well known right now that there is a downstream metabolite of boldenone that actually has AI effects. How potent that is debatable. So the metabolite is pretty potent. Um, I believe there is some speculation that this was the original blueprint for all modern day AIs. So it is quite potent. It's just a matter of how much of this metabolite do we actually produce? How do we metabolize boldenone and how this results in the downstream metabolite? That will determine how much estrogen suppression we actually get from it.
Yeah, so like so I know that some people have mentioned that like they take like any sort of EQ and it's just very hard for them to manage estrogen on. And I think that it's kind of similar though to and Masteron and Primo though. Everyone has different responses to Masteron as as far as the serum like effects and Primo from the AI effects. What have you seen has been like the best quote unquote like the best way to sort of go about phasing in EQ and sort of mitigating some of those lower estrogen side effects because that can really make a cycle be less productive once your estrogen gets to be too low.
Well, this is actually a pretty big problem because people, because of the current shortages, people come to me with the question like, what do we do now that we don't have Masteron? Do we use boldenone? And I'm always hesitant to give a blank statement, yes or no, because boldenone also increases red blood cell production to a much higher extent, um, even than testosterone. So there are people that get a lot of RBC production from testosterone. Usually, boldenone will have an even more profound effect. So you take testosterone and you take boldenone when you already have high RBCs, that's a recipe for disaster. Yes, you manage
Yeah.
your estrogen, but you also get you know, blood with the consistency of, Jello. So it depends. If you are somebody who is an endurance athlete, so in athletics, it's actually more beneficial than, let's say, in bodybuilding or in powerlifting, something that sport that uses up a lot of red blood cells, like, combat sports athletes, usually, endurance athletes, of course, those would benefit more from this compound. Now, not to say in bodybuilding it has been used a lot there. There are a lot of old school protocols, 500 testosterone, 500 boldenone, things like that. Does it work? Yes. Do a lot of people get ridiculously high red blood cell values from that? Yes. I think that's a net negative. But let's say you're somebody who gets the estrogenic lowering effects really pretty hard, and you don't get the red blood cell aspect of things to a great extent. Let's say you're somebody like myself, an asshole who's really resistant to red blood cell production, would naturally be borderline anemic. Um, Probably, taking testosterone at a 2 to 3 milligram per kilogram, 200, 300 milligram dose, adding in boldenone conservatively, 100 to 200 milligrams. And when you run into low estrogen effects, then potentially add in additional testosterone. Now, another way of doing this would be maybe using something like Dianabol, which does not impact the RBC production for people who are more sensitive, but it converts to a pretty potent methyl estradiol, which is hyper potent compared to normal estradiol. So, low dose Dianabol working with the boldenone just to make sure you're not doubling up on the red blood cell production side of things. Those are some combinations that I've been, working with to kind of skirt the shortages now, or for people who prefer Deca, or tolerate Deca well, or is a drug that would be useful to them. Yeah, that's also a good option.
basically it's complicated, and you're going to need to basically be aware of like if you do have that the susceptibility to having a higher red blood cell count. Is if that is the case, then you're probably going to be in for a bad time. Is that what I'm hearing?
Yeah, yeah. Also, keep in mind, boldenone is a very similar compound to testosterone, so it can be used as your base HRT. It can replace testosterone. You can use, let's say 500 milligrams of boldenone to get the 200 milligram to 200, 250 milligram equivalent estrogen conversion of testosterone. Now, whether or not the estrogen lowering effect will negate that and you'll run to low estrogen depends, but you're not doubling up on red blood cell producing compounds. And if you need estrogen, you can maybe go in with something like a dianabol. So it can be a situation where you can use boldenone as your primary anabolic and your base testosterone replacement, and maybe for estrogen use a highly estrogenic compound like um dianabol. God forbid, even something as crazy as mint, but that's that's a different kettle of fish. I would not mess around with that one.
Right. So when you say that, it's like I've heard a lot of people have been like complaining though about like the EQ just like absolutely crushing their levels, and like because of the long half life that obviously 28 days. Um, I know maybe had a podcast talking about like using some things to as like a first aid kit to get that up. How would you manage that on EQ if you did come across like low too low of estrogen?
Well, the most effective the most effective solution to the problem would be, just use estrogen, whether that is a estrogen enanthate and estrogen, what is it? There's a
Right?
not an isocarp. Yeah, that's a rare one. Even the enanthate, there's a commercially available injectable estrogen. I forget the ester. Um, or you can just use methyl estradiol tablets, just literally methylated estrogen. That will instantly raise your estrogen levels. So, you can use that or fast acting, highly aromatizing oral compounds like dianabol. That's probably going to be like, if you've lowered your estrogen to the point where, your joint hurts, you have zero sex drive, your estrogen is 10, then yeah,
Yeah,
probably something that aromatizes heavily and fast. That would maybe even would be a case, if you tolerate the 90 Nor's, low dose of trestolone acetate, because of the acetate ester, it is very fast acting, and that is a estrogenic nuclear bomb that converts heavily to estrogen.
right. Um, and would you say like to be like kind of more conservative when you're introducing those, or like are there any dosing ranges that you would give? Say someone did have access to like estrogen tablets.
Um, uh, for dosing for estrogen or for boldenone?
Well, yes, like in the context of the too low of estrogen, like how would you dose like these first aid remedies?
That's such a It would depend, but if we're looking at something like a Dianabol, 20 to 50 milligrams a day, depending on how big you are, how low your estrogen is. But yeah, 20 to 50 milligrams of Dianabol a day would probably raise your estrogen pretty fast. Um, Something like methyl estradiol, I believe it's 1 milligram. Tablets come in like 1 milligram strength, so it's like 1 milligram every day, maybe two for 2 to 3 days, and then go with one until you see estrogen levels climb back up. Valerate, sorry, estradiol valerate. That's the commercially pharmaceutically available form of estradiol on the market, or the most common one at least. Dosing on that will probably be somewhere around the 10 milligram every 5 days or every week range as well. But yeah, I,
Yeah,
I wouldn't. I would definitely that's kind of like a reactive approach. I would I would probably try to experiment with a low dose of boldenone. So I wouldn't just plan out a 16-week course of boldenone for somebody who doesn't even know how they react to it. I would probably start introducing it in conservatively at a low dose, try to figure out what the reaction is. And, if estrogen goes low, you bring it back up. But then the question is, what do you do then? And of course, it
Mm.
depends on the sport. Bodybuilding, they might actually want to moderate the estrogen closing in on a competition. For powerlifting, you actually would probably want a bit more estrogen just to, preserve joint health of on top of
Yeah.
cardiovascular health.
Right. Yeah, no, I think that's yeah, I just wanted to just ask that because I know that a lot of people be like, well, how much do I take of that if I do run into the issue, but I do agree with you, like just be more conservative, and that's how it is with any new compound, you want to start at at a lower dose, see how you respond, because then you can actually tease out, okay, what, effects am I getting? Do I like this drug, whatever? And then if you do agree with it, then you can slowly increase it as needed to get the benefits that you want from your cycle. Um,
Absolutely. Boldenone is, I've used it myself in the past. I know people that have used it. I have seen people that did not get the um, estrogen lowering effects that bad. So, they could take boldenone, 300, 400, 500 milligrams and not crash their estrogen. I've also seen people that took similar doses and their red blood cells were maybe top of the range, but not out of range. So with boldenone, I would usually caution people like do your damn cardio. Try
yeah,
to,
yeah,
do a blood donation, do your cardio, try to prevent running into those issues, and then um also when it comes to estrogen, have some sort of a first aid kit measure prepared, even if it's a testosterone propionate, something that would raise estrogen pretty fast. I know not
yeah.
everybody has access to all of these tools, but Dianabol is accessible, Test Prop is accessible, hell, even Sustanon has a fast acting testosterone, so things of that nature.
Yeah, it definitely is. If you're just having to go with like waiting that out, it's like you can still like get through it, but it's just like it's just not a good feeling having the low
No.
estrogen. And we did briefly mention cardio. I think that's actually something we should briefly talk about as far as recommendations for like frequency, because you and I are both of the opinion, and the fact it doesn't matter is that steps are not cardio. You need to actually do something that makes you like work a little bit harder than that to count as cardio. What do you typically recommend to most people who are just taking any dose of anabolic steroids for cardiovascular health?
Um, Typically I would say minimum would be 3 times a week, 20 to 30 minutes of low intensity steady state, something that gets your heart rate. You can go with the old school 220 minus your age and base 65 to 75% off of that, maybe even 60 to 70, depending on how fit you are. But, for most people, age 25 to 40, somewhere between 125 and 140 BPM, you should probably have 20 to 30 minutes 3 times a week of that kind of zone two cardio. Now, the when it comes to red blood cells, the more intense the cardio, the more you burn, but the more intense the cardio, the less you can sustain that intensity. So, you can't say you do 5 minutes of hit cardio and you're burning up a lot of red blood cells. No. Now, steps are going to burn red blood cells, but it's so inefficient. Just like improving your cardiovascular health, steps actually do not if you're any manner of fit. But when it comes to red blood cells, yes, they will burn them, but it's a very, very slow process. So the happy median would be, yeah, do, your zone two cardio at least 3 times a week for general health and fitness. If you're actually, trying to mitigate red blood cells, keep in mind there are endurance athletes that train 3 to 4 hours a day or more
Yeah,
continuously. And those are the people that, I can say that they would probably benefit from something that increases their red blood cell count because they run into an exercise induced anemia just from the amount of oxidative stress of how many red blood cells they burn during that aerobic activity.
Yeah. I think something that I get this concern all the time from people that are like, am I gonna lose my progress by getting, just, even like 30 minutes of cardio every single day? It's like, no, like if that is like truly like if you're getting that type of an effect from doing 30 minutes of cardio a day, like you're just really out of shape. And it's a good thing you started to do your cardio. That's what I
Yeah,
said.
yeah, no, absolutely. The people that say that cardio will make you lose your gains are probably the people who are just too lazy to do it.
Yeah.
I don't think cardio will negatively impact. I think
You have
cardio
to
will
do
only positively impact.
so much like physical activity to like truly have like a negative impact on strength and hypertrophy because your body adapts to it. Like I always tell people like you're going to tell like if like long term with that level of physical activity, like you just don't feel like you're ever like recovered in your legs or just like really, really tired. I think it can be a more of a thing if you are bigger and heavier, right? Because you are going to sustain more of those, more damage just from walking around, but it's not a big deal. So cool. I'm glad
Yeah.
we talking about that briefly. So why would somebody, let's say like, why would someone choose to take EQ? Like, what are some unique benefits of it? I know that there is like some um, downstream conversion into like DHB, and you and I are both very, very fond of that. That could be one of them, but no one can know about that. Just kidding. Anyways, what would you like? What are some properties of it that you think are, may make it a good choice for people?
No, I was kind of maybe slightly negative towards, Boldenone, but that's more of a people say like, oh, this will replace Mastron. No, it's very case dependent. And Mastron propionate is still pretty much available, so I would probably try to look into the propionate ester before thinking, oh, just go to Boldenone. Now, Boldenone does have some unique benefits. We mentioned the fact that it can lower your estrogen, which for some people might be a good thing. It does increase your red blood cells, which for some people might be a good thing. Um, it is pretty well known for increasing appetite. I think that my suspicion is that that has something to do with the increase in red blood cells. So it kind of goes hand in hand. But if you're in an off season and you need something that would increase your appetite, Boldenone is a pretty effective tool for that. Um, so that would be a benefit. Yes, Boldenone is, for all intents and purposes, a testosterone analog. So it is susceptible to aromatase. It converts it primarily to E1. It is susceptible to 5-alpha reductase, which converts it to a dihydro form, but not dihydrotestosterone because it's not testosterone. It's dihydroboldenone. So DHB is basically the DHT version derived from boldenone, which has
Mhm.
some very unique and interesting properties. Now, Boldenone's structure isn't, I believe, the conversion to DHB, I think it's not a one-to-one conversion, so you don't get as much DHB as you would get DHT, although it could possibly be. So, the more Boldenone you take, the more endogenous DHB you produce, which, could be a good thing. Um, some people in bodybuilding spheres have compared Boldenone to DECA, the nandrolone deconate. I fail to see the similarities between the two drugs from a lot of points of view outside of the conversion to E1 and um, the long ester half-life. I fail to see the comparison. So no, Boldenone will not replace a nandrolone in a protocol. They're not that similar, so I don't know where that came from. But yeah, I think that, if you are okay with the effects of Boldenone and you are okay with the red blood cells and the estrogenic or anti-estrogenic effects, you can benefit from it and maybe use it as I wouldn't say replacement, but maybe complementing another anabolic that would probably take the role of Mastron on. So, maybe it's a case where you use, instead of 400 Mastron enanthate, you would use 200 Mastron propionate and let's say two-ish hundred boldenone, kind of like a happy middle. I think that that would be an interesting use case. Now, there has been one particular negative that's been attributed to boldenone, and that is elevated anxiety. There have been, a few years ago, there was a big craze about, oh, boldenone raises anxiety to crazy levels, which wasn't a thing in the, let's say, early 2000s, 90s, quote, back in the day. Now, that is an interesting story. Is it because maybe back then people were less um, open about their emotions? Wasn't quite such a thing.
Right.
Was it more of a, maybe they didn't have access to underground UGL boldenone, so they used the Equipoise. So, they were limited by the volume of the injections. Nobody was going to pin, 6 mLs to get 300 milligrams. Maybe it was just or maybe it's related to the conversion to E1 versus E2, because the nandrolone family is also pretty well known for having psychological impacts. I don't know. I've never experienced it. I've run across a few people that have, and I've run across a lot of people that have not had any um psychological negatives from boldenone. So the anxiety thing is, in my opinion, it's like a lot of things with anabolics, case dependent. But it is,
Mm.
it is a thing that has been noticed, and it is a thing that, I'd like to put out there. Just, if we're actually trying to build a profile of this compound, I would want to put that out there as well.
Yeah, I think that the mental effects of drugs are just so variable between people. I've never had any like negative side effects like as far as I'm taking that. Like if anything, I might get a little bit more like aggressive, but I've always been a little bit more like a laid back person. The one thing I have noticed is like on DHB, like I do feel like kind of like more chill
Mhm.
mentally, which is kind of weird. Um, I know that like on search, like that's how it's, a lot of people have actually like reported on like EQ too. I think it could be have something to do with how it impacts estrogen, and that could be like one of the big things there. Uh, but like as far as like muscle and strength gains, pretty similar in strength to like say like a mastron or testosterone. I'm assuming, right?
Yeah, yeah. Anabolic androgenic ratio is 100 to 50. So technically, it is as anabolic as testosterone. I don't think it's wildly more potent at muscle building or strength gains. I don't see the neurological improvements that you would see from a mastron. So, I would, from a muscle building perspective, I would probably put it somewhere along the lines of, say, mastron. From a strength, I would put it kind of like in a very neutral place. Primobolan, let's say. So it's not a strength drug. It doesn't drive neurology to the same extent as, something like Mastron or Winstrol. Definitely not as much as DHB, although the downstream metabolite might influence that in a way. So yeah, I think it's a good compound if you need it, if you can tolerate it. If you can tolerate the red blood cells and the estrogen modulations, I think it's a great compound. I don't think it's for everybody, because most people, that's one of the biggest things I see in blood work is high RBCs. And then adding in boldenone is just not an option in that case. And if
Yeah.
it crushes somebody's estrogen, then again, it's kind of like, okay, now we need to take a drug to mitigate the negatives of this drug. So, what do we do? What's the thing that we can fix? And that is only if the red blood cell aspect is not an issue, because, you know, if it lowers estrogen and raises red blood cells, then that's an automatic no. my
Yeah,
opinion.
that's not good. Yeah, I'm one of those people who's a very high red blood cell person because I live in Utah. And the funny thing is that even like my natural friends, I've seen like their blood work, they don't they also have pretty high hematocrit too. So like for someone like me, those elevations like that sort of thing is pretty top of mind to say the least. As far as negatives of like the you talk about that quite frequently. What are some of the main negative signs of like maybe having a too high of a hematocrit red blood cell count? Um, and are there any strategies that you could maybe use like while taking EQ or something that does increase red blood cells a lot to lower down the red blood cells? We already talked about cardio, but maybe like supplemental or pharmacological interventions.
Yeah, that's actually a very good question. So signs, I'm going to credit Dave Crossland for this one. He made a pretty good um it's not quite an analogy. It was more of a more, more of a story. Said like client came to him, said like, I just feel sluggish until I warm up. So
Mm,
basically, if you kind of feel you wake up in the morning, you feel a bit groggy, you have a bit of brain fog, you start moving, physically moving, and kind of things start moving in your head as well. If you go to the gym and you just feel sluggish and lethargic and low energy, and once you start to warm up, once your body temperature starts to elevate, you get to your first set, your second set, you start to your energy goes actually up and you start to get in the groove. That's a pretty good sign that you have thick blood, that your hematocrit is high, your red blood cells, hemoglobin are high, because temperature, if you take oil and you heat it up, it becomes more fluid. Take
right.
oil, you put it in cold, it becomes more viscous. Same thing with your blood. Heat turns a viscous substance into a slightly less viscous, slightly more fluid substance. So, yes, I think that that's a good sign. If you wake up and you feel a bit groggy, if you wake up and you feel lethargic, if you feel that once you're warmed up and once you're good way through your workout, you start to feel more energetic, that's a pretty good sign. Also being red in the face and out of breath and things like that are pretty obvious
Yeah.
signs as well.
I think it
As
also
for
like
measures,
sorry with that thing too as an important caveat is that's like after being hydrated too.
yeah,
It's
absolutely,
like if like
absolutely.
if you have like, you could be dehydrated and you kind of have that like what's the word? It's like just like that fake high hematocrit. Um,
Yeah,
and then you get hydrated and you feel a lot better. It's sort of like similar with that. So it's like all the time.
yeah, absolutely. No, hydration is crucial, regardless of, but yeah, if especially if you're hydrated and you still have those issues, then definitely it's a problem. As for solutions, yeah, outside of cardio, blood donations. That's pretty much it. There are a few things, supplemental. I think it's naringin, which is, I believe, the grapefruit extract. It might lower red blood cells slightly. Although I find that supplemental interventions are pretty useless, and actual medications that lower red blood cells are, yeah, they're
Yeah.
if not exactly chemotherapy drugs, they're on the same class as chemotherapy drugs. So things that kill off red blood cells are definitely medications that would do other bad shit as well. I would definitely not fuck around with that. The best way to
Yeah.
reduce red blood cells is, just do your cardio, stay hydrated, donate blood, and lay off lay off the anadrol, the boldenone, the high testosterone, things like that.
Yeah. I have tried supplements in the past and I think the main thing I've seen is like it prevents it from getting like as high as it would, but it doesn't like prevent it from increasing. I think is like the main thing. Like that's something you have to like be off or get blood donations for that to actually happen in like my personal experience, with myself
Yeah,
and my clients. So we already
yeah,
kind of talked about starting. Sorry, go ahead.
Oh no, I was just gonna say that things like the naringin, anything that is in that family of drugs, inhibits the CYP enzyme complex, which is actually a bad thing. Some people say, "Oh, well, you get more drug plasma levels," and I'm like, "Yeah," and that's not always a good thing because
Yeah,
drugs that linger in your system more, yes, you get maybe 10% extra benefit, but you get, 4x the negatives. So drugs should be metabolized at your quote natural rate. Messing around with CYP enzymes is, in my opinion, a really dumb idea. So it wouldn't, even
yeah.
if it would work, it definitely would have other negatives. So yeah, the naringin and synephrins and bioperines and things like that. I really don't like that class of supplements.
Well, I think, well, we definitely don't take those. I
Yeah.
think that, and then as for, we already kind of talked about, like doses and just starting off low. I guess just as far as the starting dose, like what would you typically use, say, like, in conjunction with testosterone, for example, is that I think that's how most people are taking it right now. How would you start somebody off?
Probably around 100 milligrams a week. It's very slow moving, so it's good and a bad thing. You won't see the effects until later on in your course. But it will also take, if you have the negatives, it will also take a lot of time to clear out from your system. So probably starting off at 100, for somebody who never used it before, starting off at 100, escalating every 2 to 3 weeks by, again, 100 milligrams. Somebody's more experienced knows how they react to it. If they react favorably, maybe start off a bit higher, 200, 300. As far as the highest dose, yeah, 600 milligrams if you can tolerate it. I've seen people that have used that. If you're using it as your, you know, HRT, testosterone replacement compound, um, and you're not extremely susceptible to either the RBC issues or the estrogen modulation issues, probably start off with a 1-to-1 with what you would normally take as your testosterone, and maybe even go a bit higher. If you can tolerate the red blood cells, and if it doesn't completely crash your estrogen. For somebody who, let's say, can tolerate the red blood cells, get maybe a moderate elevation compared to testosterone, maybe a bit more than testosterone, but doesn't get the estrogenic negatives, you would probably need to dose it higher than testosterone just to get that conversion to E1. And
Mm,
the E1, from personal experience and from what I also know from others, you will function the same, lipid profiles, joint health, etc., but mentally it's not the same.
right.
You have a different mental state. You can have a low estrogen kind of like mental state, libido especially, even on a testosterone equated dose of boldenone. As for the conversion to DHB in this case, will it fully replace an androgen? Again, I think it would still need to be slightly higher than testosterone. If you want to replace testosterone, you probably need to dose slightly higher than your normal testosterone dose to get adequate androgenic activity because
Yeah,
it
that makes
is
sense.
50% as androgenic as testosterone.
Right. Cool. It's everything I wanted to address. Did you have anything else you wanted to talk about with EQ?
Hmm, good question. Honestly, I think it's an interesting drug. It's a compound that has been around for it's probably one of the earliest steroids, 1949. That's the original patent. I have not found any information as to why it was discontinued and moved to the veterinary um, side of things. it does coincide with the whole, steroid scandals, so, 70s. But other than that, has been used in clinical medicine. There's some information on that. Was relatively successful, very slow moving. So, it's not one of those, if you're not planning for a 14, 16 week protocol, if you're going for like an 8 week, 10 week protocol, it's probably not even going to reach peak plasma levels by the time you're done. And your off time, you will still be on that compound for, if it has a 3 week half-life, you're probably going to see, you know, 10, 15 weeks until it's completely out of your system.
Right. Live your good taste. If you're trying to cheat a drug test, don't take this drug.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, definitely not a drug for that. And it also has because it is structurally different than testosterone, it does have different downstream metabolites that are detected on drug tests.
Right.
My suspicion is that they're pretty much the same ones as dianabol because same molecule.
Hmm. Very, very interesting. Well, cool. Thank you guys for listening to the episode. As always, I will include your show's contact information in the show notes. If you guys want to hire him, which you should. He just launched his new business. Actually, I want to give you a little bit to talk a little about what Project Mayhem is actually here.
Oh, yeah, thank you, actually. Yeah, Project Mayhem, the new my new coaching service, just launched it, focused exclusively on coaching and education. We work with athletes, bodybuilders, powerlifters, strongman athletes of any and all types, combat sports, team sports, etc. And yeah, we are a team. We're looking forward to putting out some good content and coaching some really cool athletes. So stay tuned. A lot to come.
Very nice. Yeah, I'll also include that in the show notes. So thank you guys for listening. I'll talk to you guys in the next episode.